Hello and welcome to another episode of Emacs Chat. Today's guest is Phil Hagelberg, who you might know as Technomancy and the creator of all sorts of useful things, including a starter kit, which is now with a better defaults package, I think, and other good stuff related to closure and cool things. So hello, Phil. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really looking forward to getting to chat.
Okay, before we dive into the why you like Emacs and what you use it for, I kind of like showing people that yes, people do actually have lives outside Emacs. So can you tell us a little bit more about what your life is like? What else are you interested in?
Sure, yeah. Let's see. A big part of what I do is working remotely. So I've been doing that since about 2009. You can see this setting here. This is my converted shed in my backyard that I like to call the code lab. So I just, yeah, a nice little commute across the backyard there.
And that looks like a standing desk.
Right, yeah, standing desk, and then when I get tired of that, I've got the recliner there. Yeah, you know, kind of go between two extremes.
Yeah, and from your blog, I see you've also quite the interest in custom keyboards,
That's right,
hardware
yeah. I don't know what
hacking.
you can see over here, but I've been getting into hardware hacking, and this is my latest project, building these custom ergonomic uh, mechanical keyboards. I've been having a lot of fun with. So
Wow, that's cool.
yeah,
So that and Heroku and and having kids. How old are your kids now?
yeah. I've got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So the older is getting into school, and
Wow.
yeah, quite a handful.
That's cool. And somehow with all of that, you still managed to find time to work on lots of Emacs repositories and little packages to help people out. So thank you for sharing that with the community. But I just wanted to find out, how did you get into Emacs in the first place? What was that story like?
Yeah, let's see. So that would have been about 2003 when I was in university. Got into it just I learned Dvorak, and I came down to the choice between Emacs and VI, and VI has the HKJL, and I looked at that and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. It's like HKJL. No, forget that. No, I'm not doing that. I mean, now I understand. Like, of course, you can map that, but at the time, it was like, that set me down on the right path.
That's awesome. So I guess we're all lucky that you did the keyboard switch first before you did an editor.
There you go. Yeah.
And so, what got you interested in it, aside from the fact that you could actually, use the key bindings and change them around?
Um. Yeah. So I think a big part of it was Emacs Lisp, although I kind of took a while to ramp up on that. But I had uh, experimented unsuccessfully with like writing programs, metaprogramming, and that when I was much younger and doing like QBasic or something. Of course, you can imagine that doesn't work very well. um, but then when I saw Lisp, it was like, oh, this actually looks like it's designed to do that in a way that actually makes sense, and that really intrigued me. But then once I got into it more and more, what I really came to appreciate more is just the live feedback and the notion of you're always interacting with the program as it's running. That is just such an appealing concept for me in just programs I use day to day, and then as I started doing more professionally, systems that I work with, to like having that live interaction and being able to inspect and reprogram on the fly is just really
Yeah.
a good boost for me there. So,
You mentioned REPLs a lot in your blog posts, and for people who are new to Emacs and listening to this, a REPL is a read, evaluate, print loops. You type something in and it does stuff. Closure is one of the things that you use REPLs for, and there's Emacs Lisp, of course. Do you use REPLs for anything else?
sure, yeah. I've been getting into maintaining an Erlang system at work, and that kind of takes it to the next level because when you look at your REPL, you're really in a real way communicating with the whole cluster at once. And you can turn on your tracing from your one console session to trace functions across the entire cluster of however many nodes you have. So that really come to appreciate that debugging that system at work.
So does that mean you managed to convince all of your other coworkers to switch to Emacs?
it's a back and forth there. We do working remotely. It's it's really important to be able to collaborate, and so remotely with other people who are like the team I'm on is all over this hemisphere, all over North America, and so being able to SSH in and work together is a big plus. And so there are a few Vim people on my team, but they at least they still have that property of being able to live inside a Emacs session or something.
Yeah,
that counts for a lot.
Speaking of Emacs then and pairing, you mentioned that you've been working on a service to make it easier to pair, and I'd love to later on find out how the Vim people are dealing with this. I'm sure it's kind of you pick a neutral ground for the editor or whatever you slap every so often. But do you want to share a little bit of what is that, and maybe is there a demo that you can show us?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's see. So the idea came from this really neat service called pair.io that a friend of mine started. Unfortunately, it kind of fell over when GitHub deprecated their their version 2 API. I think didn't get upgraded for the new version. So the way it works is you give it a repository and then you give it a list of people you want to collaborate with, and it'll just spin up an EC2 node for you, and it'll check out the project and it'll do any kind of initialization you need, and it'll get your personal .files on there and put everyone's public key on the machine for you, and then everyone just SSHs in and can share Emacs sessions. So really cool idea. The tricky thing there is his service was, what do you call it? I always felt a little, he put me on the beta list, and I always felt a little reluctant to use it because every time I spun something up, it was like he hadn't implemented billing yet. So it was coming out of his credit card, and I was like, oh, do I really need this? Like maybe I'll skip this. But I mean, it was really useful, especially for a remote worker. And then when it fell over, I thought, or when GitHub turned off their version 2 API, I thought, like, I wonder how hard it would be to bring that back up to speed. But then I always thought about, like, oh, the billing, that sounds really hard. I don't want to bother with that. Dealing with people's private information. So I never got around to it until I realized, like, what if you could do it in a way that would let you make the user bring their own AWS account to it.
Yeah.
So then, I can get out of the business of launching these nodes on my account and just say, look, here's a way to streamline it for you. And that's what I ended up doing with Syme. So it's Syme is the syme.herokuapp.com is the project. So I could be glad to do a demo if you're interested.
Sure. Yeah.
If I can figure out the.
If you hover over the Google Hangout screen, you should see a green icon on the left side that looks like a monitor with an arrow, and then you can use that to share either a specific application or your entire desktop.
Okay, cool. Let me pull that up.
And while you're doing that, one of the reasons I was interested in this was because you mentioned in one of your blog posts that you've been helping with these user group sessions around Emacs, I guess. Kind of just pick a project and all work on it together using Syme to just have everyone working on the same Emacs session.
Yeah, we use this at the Seattle Closure Group.
Closure, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's quite nice for that. Just because you can get everyone in the group to join like a GitHub organization,
Yeah.
and then I can just say I want all of the group invited, and using the public GitHub API, you can pull in all their public keys and add them to the node. So useful for that. Are you seeing
Yep,
the
I can see
browser
your
here?
screen. Yep, it's got a picture on it. It's got user/project, collaborate, etc., etc.
Cool.
Wow.
So I'll go ahead and load up. So you collaborate around a project.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and load up. This is the repository for the keyboard project, but it can be any open source thing, and load that up. And then you go in here, and I can put in Sasha C and anyone else I want to invite in there, and then yeah. So I'm not gonna. I don't want to put my
your details now. Yeah. So
details here. I actually have a node I already launched earlier today that I can jump to. So once you fill this in, it kicks this off.
This is totally the cooking lesson demo of.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
What you get eventually, fast forward, 3 or 4 minutes, is this. It says the node is ready. It sets up a DNS entry for it, and then it shows our two faces here that we're the ones that it's preloaded the public keys for.
All right, and I'm SSHing in, and it did actually pick up my key. Holy cow, that's awesome!
Yeah, let me pull up.
That's attached. I'm guessing that's what I need to do. No, there's no session.
Yeah. Okay, I don't remember if I shared the whole desktop, or if
you can unshare and then share again.
Yeah, let me. Here we go.
That's cool. I was in a shared Emacs session with somebody else who wanted help with Emacs, because I like helping people one-on-one. Also, it's a great way to get past these minor inconveniences and errors and all that stuff. But the amazing thing is when you're watching somebody work, you're like, how the heck did you do that? Or you can be like, oh, I see you're doing MetaX and you're typing everything in manually. Do you know about I do and SMX? Yes.
Oh yeah. So I just realized I don't have my I don't have my key pair on this machine. So do you want to go ahead and share from yours?
Okay. Although we don't get the totally cool whatchamacallit fact that you can also type things and have things happen. So anyway,
well, actually, I can do it from here on my other machine. But it's not
okay.
The second machine.
Fantastic. It's technomancy.238.time.in. Anyway, so for people who are watching this, so basically Technomancy has just spun up a shared Emacs session on an EC2 instance that people can SSH to, and they can authenticate using the SSH public keys that are already on GitHub. So it's great for working on a GitHub project together.
So go ahead and attach, and it should load up.
Let's attach. And here we go.
So yeah, the Emacs is booting. It's pulling in the packages that I've preloaded, and yeah. So let's see.
Let me make the screen a little bit bigger too.
Yeah,
that would help. Yeah.
It's like the first boot, always takes a little longer with the packages, but
yeah, but that's so it basically spins up the EC2 instance, and then it initializes everything from scratch, because of course you're starting with, and here we are.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Oops. I'm making your computer beep.
There we go. Yeah, so then it fetches your dot files from GitHub if you've got a .simrc repository, and it'll run that there. And then you can also have project-specific files for if your project needs a database or some Debian package installed.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So this would be great if you're quickly working with people. I like the fact that it handles all the pub key stuff automatically.
Yeah, that was a neat discovery that GitHub just exposes those, so you can do curl that github.com/keys, and boom, you can just throw that straight
Ah,
into your authorized keys entry, and
I
you're good
did
to go.
not know that. And so I'm really happy about the increasing popularity of cloud instances of, things like EC2 or DigitalOcean.
Hmm.
So just as a way for you to quickly spin up something and you don't have to deal with SSH tunnels and letting
Yeah,
people have access to your own machine and all that stuff. So this is good. This is all sorts of great stuff.
yeah. It's one gotcha there is that they're not on your machine, but typically if you SSH in your if you have SSH agent forwarding on, you can actually still the agent basically can answer SSH challenge responses on your behalf. And so we had to go in and specifically disable that for SIME,
Mm.
because otherwise, when you're pairing with someone, they could, as long as you were connected, they could impersonate you. Um,
Ah,
so
so I probably should disconnect now.
no. It's we
Interesting.
blocked that
Yeah. Oh, okay.
from doing that in the SSH server config there.
That's
Uh,
pretty cool.
yeah, so
Okay.
you can do that on a per user basis. There's a little wrapper
Yeah.
and a GitHub key, and then there's also on a per org basis.
Yeah. What this makes me think of, because I've actually been talking to a couple of people about, and let me turn off screen sharing so we're back over here. I remember I talked to Nick Ferrier about he was also very interested in this idea of swarm coding, right? Just everyone having a virtual hackathon, and just working on things together. And I was also talking to Tom Marble, who's been working on getting more people into Clojure and Emacs and other things like that.
Yeah.
Really, the idea of people being able to share, and at the same time, maybe they have some kind of Google Hangout or Skype conversation
Mhm.
going on back end, maybe a SIP client instead. To be able to talk about the code and share tips. I think a I would love to see more of those sessions.
Yeah, we've only so far used it for local meetings, but it would be it would be a great tool for something where anyone could just pop on from anywhere online. I haven't had the chance to experiment with that myself, but I could see a lot of potential there for kind of let's explore this program together, which can
Mm.
be a lot of fun. It's always a little tricky to try to find a good problem to solve together. At least for the closure group,
Good.
we've had some. Let's see, we've had a few good sessions there where we've come up with some really interesting but still small problem to solve. But a lot of the times, it's hard to find something that can still be challenging but not too contrived. But if you're working on a real world project and you just want to you want to shoulder surf on someone who is, then yeah, it's fantastic.
I've seen a couple of live coding screencasts. So basically,
Mhm.
someone's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I want to customize Emacs to do this. Watch me as I try to figure it out." I've even recorded one of these myself. Uh,
Yeah.
I find it only really becomes watchable, at least for my part, when I recorded mine. If I speed things up, so it looks like I'm typing about 4 times as fast as I do.
Great.
But
We can go back and forth, and if it's live, you can ask
yeah.
questions, and
But I can see if you're getting stuck on an issue or if you're trying to
mhm.
figure out how to code your way around, org or Emacs internals or working with REPLs, then
Yeah.
maybe you can find an Emacs mentor to pair with you or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that Sign does get used by that. I wanted to make it as quick as possible to get started. It just takes a few bits of information, your account, your project, and who you want to work with, and then you should be off to the races. So,
And that's SYNE. So where do
oh
people
yeah,
find this?
sign.herokuapp.com.
Oh yeah,
I'll
sign.heroku
pull
app.
it up here.
herokuapp.com. I will go check that out. Oh, there is no actual app configured at that host name. I am probably
Uh,
mistyping it.
I'll pull it up here for you.
Oh,
Yeah,
Sime.
SYME. Yeah,
That's because I was misspelling it.
there you go.
Yes.
So, yeah, the
Okay. Cool.
I was really happy with how it ended up being pretty simple once I narrowed it down to just like, we're going to get the credentials and we're going to do this on the user's behalf. It's about like a 500 line Clojure web application.
Yeah.
So I'm able to actually use that to, when people have questions about how to do a specific technique, I can just link them to that. Mm-hmm. I've gotten some pull
So
requests
have
and
you
stuff
written
too.
an Emacs interface for it yet?
Oh yeah, that could be interesting. Where you could launch it just like MX.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah,
Pair
actually,
with.
throw in a little REST API on top of that with GitHub OAuth. Shouldn't be out of the question. Yeah, that would be interesting to
Yeah.
use a like learning OAuth project.
And then it could pick up the current repository you're working in naturally, and
Yeah,
really.
right.
Yeah.
That could be cool.
It's kind of fun how you can just tweak all these things and make them more efficient. I had a nice stroll through your config earlier, and I was
Oh,
very amused because one of the functions you had commented out was something that limited the size of your functions.
oh, that's a fun one. Yeah. Let's see. I forget what that was called, but someone on IRC
Size
was just saying size limit. Yeah. Someone on IRC was just saying like, man, no function should ever be more than 25 lines. I'm like, yeah, that seems like reasonable, right? I wonder how hard it would be to like enforce that. And so it turns out not that hard. There's like, is it before change hooks or something where if you throw an error in there, something the change doesn't actually get applied. So yeah, this is just if you try to write a function that gets too long, it's like nope, sorry, delete some lines. I don't have that turned on for
Yeah.
obvious reasons, but I just as an experiment, like I bet you can do
Yeah. It was interesting because your config was actually shorter than I expected, in
that.
the sense that I guess you've pushed a lot of it out to packages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's been kind of my Emacs journey in a way. So back in 2008, I guess, there was Tromi's ELPA was the only package management system, and it was still, I think when I started using it there were only like 20 packages or something. And every time you wanted to upload one, you had to email him, and he'd be like, "Okay, I've uploaded it." Uh, but I could see a lot of potential there. People were, at the time, a lot of people were just installing off the Emacs wiki, which kind of made me a little nervous.
Yeah.
Um, and so at the time, I started the Emacs Starter Kit. That was just a Git repository that you cloned and used that as your own dot files, and that really took off. It gained quite a lot of traction, but over time, I've come to appreciate that it's a little too magic, I think.
Hmm.
I would get a lot of people coming in to chat or whatever and just saying like, it's doing this thing and I don't know why. And like for me, I think, oh, that thing is great, but for them, yeah, it tastes vary. So, and the main thing wasn't that it was doing the wrong thing, but the main thing was that it was just this pile of stuff that they grabbed and they didn't really have a deeper understanding there. So
Hmm.
I've started to shy away from that approach and be more about, well, if there's this cool thing you want to share, then like the Emacs package should be like the unit of sharing, and that can be documented. It can do one thing really well, and you can decide when you're pulling that in, like, is this worth the trade-offs, and you can make that on a much more granular level.
Hmm.
I
So
feel like
like better defaults, sort of that size.
right, yeah. So Better Defaults is a library I took that I basically took the starter kit and hacked off anything that could possibly be objectionable. And this is what like 99% of all Emacs users can agree on. Like, this is the way Emacs should work. And so very little magic and also very well documented. So
Yeah. Although it's kind
It's
of
much
funny
clearer there.
because yeah, when you're talking about new users would probably benefit the most from better defaults, I actually think they should keep their menu bar on at least for the first little while. But and the toolbar, maybe
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, it definitely it's very similar to the kind of config that I've eventually grown towards also. Just minimal, diminished in some cases from a personal config and so forth.
Yeah, I think the menu bar is good in a lot of modes, but one thing that I've seen is people, it can be misleading because people assume that uh, everything is in the menu bar, and they
Yeah.
sometimes will not look beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to, sometimes I'll turn it on if I'm exploring a new mode, and I know that that mode does a good job of using the menu bar. Like GNU's, when I was using GNU's, was pretty good about that. But
Yeah.
yeah, not having the menu bar can be a little disorienting, but it does force you to learn how the help commands work, which are guaranteed to cover everything. So,
Mm-hmm.
but
So
yeah, there's room for it,
yeah,
definitely.
since you were learning Emacs and Emacs Lisp without the help of all these lovely things, what helped you learn about, how to customize Emacs to the extent that you have?
Oh, probably nothing had as big an impact as the IRC channel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I started using Emacs a little bit before I was using IRC, but I didn't really take off and like uh, dig in until that point. And, it's it's so weird. I mean, you know what it's like, but it's such a mishmash of people from all over talking about all kinds of different things.
And
Uh,
occasionally, very rarely, but sometimes we manage to talk about Emacs.
yeah, pretty much. It's a little ridiculous, but it's a great community. I love hanging out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just exposes you to so many different viewpoints that most of the channels I'm in on Freenode are specific to one language or one application, where you don't get as much diversity of opinion and backgrounds too. So
Yeah, and it's great for the totally random. I had no idea Emacs could do that when you
oh
see
yeah,
somebody's answers to the question. Yeah.
all the time. And,
Yeah, so IRC, gotta be on it.
yeah, yeah. Although it can be a little distracting at times too, especially if you work well. If you work remotely, it's like this dual, keeps you sane, but then like depends on your definition of sanity whether that
Hmm.
actually happens or not. Uh,
Yeah. Are there other interesting snippets in your config? Like how else have you what have you tried, or also what have you discarded from it since you've cut it down to such a size?
yeah, let's see. Well, I was using GNUs for a long time, and I ended up switching there to MU4E, which is more of a search-based interface to email,
Mm.
and I like that a lot. It works really well. I If you're used to Gmail and the way that it kind of puts search at front and center, um, it does a good job of that as well. And it's a lot more accessible than GNUs, which can kind of feel like a bit of a
Yeah.
dungeon crawl to try to find what you need. But
It's immensely powerful, but also very, very large.
yeah, I think yeah, and I have tons of respect for it. I just end up the MU4E suits my needs better. Also, MU4E is designed to be asynchronous from the ground up, so
Yeah.
no blocking calls there, which is quite nice.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, GNU says introduce some delays to my workflow from time to time.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a hard problem just not having really solid concurrency
Yeah.
primitives in the runtime.
Now you've
Um,
also got a bunch of other packages that you use in addition to ME4E. I
mhm,
have your init file in front of me, so I can rattle them off and you can tell us, oh, that's interesting things that are happening here. But of course, they've got better defaults since you have it. You might as well take advantage of it.
mhm,
Closure paredit. The,
mhm.
I keep going back to that quote. I think it was Wagner who passed it on from what he heard you say, that if you're not the kind of person who can deal with para editors or smart parents, you become that kind of person. Working on it.
It's not for everyone. Just for people. What kind of person you should aspire to be. No.
What is it like for you? I mean, how do you wrap your brain around not just the slurping and barfing, but all the other things that you do with it?
I think so the main thing people get tripped up on, I think, is part it will just refuse to do certain things, right? When it can tell that those operations will result in like broken pairing, right?
The number of times I've hit Control Q close parenthesis.
Right. Yeah. It's trying to set you on the right path, but so it does that by just making sure that all the operations it does are protected. Like you can't, every time you insert a paren, you have to insert a matching one, and every time you kill, you can only kill up to the end. Otherwise, that would leave you in an invalid state. And as long as you limit yourself to the commands that Part knows about, then it provides this guarantee that you have. But yeah, so Control W kill region is not one of those commands. So you have to train yourself to avoid that. When you use kill region, you're saying no, Part, like I know better than you, which is usually not the case. But once you've internalized that, you end up operating on a higher level where you're not thinking in terms of characters anymore. You're thinking in terms of expressions. You're saying, I want to kill this whole string or this whole form, not like I want to kill this point up to this point.
Yeah.
It's higher level commands, I would say.
Okay.
And a lot of people, well, especially for people who are new to Lisp, they think like this is so intimidating seeing all these parentheses everywhere. And if you have Pareted on, then it's really just, I mean, obviously it does take some adaptation, but it's no additional mental overhead for you. It's just, you're changing the structure directly. Yeah.
Okay, so basically just keep at it and keep your fingers off Control W, and eventually you'll get the hang of it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can do is just unbind Control W temporarily, or change it to another bind.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So actually, one thing I did was I started when I started using my 40% keyboard. So this is my travel board that I designed. So you can see it has very few keys, 42 keys to be precise. And I had to move tab kind of way off to the corner there. It's not very convenient. And so most programs that are properly Unixy, like Emacs and anything running in a terminal, will interpret Control I as a tab. Because inside a terminal, they're literally the same. Pressing tab sends a Control I key code, but Emacs does the translation even when it's in a GUI, and I was able to teach my web browser to do the same. But that was great when I was on here, but it was so tempting. I kept wanting to push this key here that doesn't actually exist. So what I ended up doing was taking my regular keyboard that I use when I'm in the office and just plucking out that key. And so there's no more keycap there anymore. And so then you learn really quick then, right?
That's really hardcore. I remember the time I think I bound my left control to ring a bell.
Oh, wow.
Because I was trying to get into the capsus control thing.
Same deal. Exactly.
Yeah. So negative reinforcement, or just making things less functional to force yourself to new ways. But I'm a little curious because you mentioned like 42 keys. You'd imagine that with Emacs you'd want to add more keys instead of reduce the number of keys. So how does it all work with key chords and stuff?
Yeah. Well, a big part of it is that you can see the two here are. It just puts way more on your thumbs. So like these are Control and Alt, so they're much more accessible, and like Shift. But then they're so that is, it doesn't make more room available, but it does make it nicer on your hands. But then also the most of the punctuation is on the FN layer, so you kind of have to hold down FN and then start to hit the punctuation. But for a lot of the punctuation, you need shift for it anyway. Like the parentheses, you're pressing shift and then going way up to the to the top right. And on this keyboard, it's just the parentheses are on the home row, so it's actually less reaching overall anyway.
Designed by a Lisp programmer.
Yeah. You can tell, yeah, the front and center, the parentheses.
I'm surprised they even need a shift or a function key.
Yeah, so I mean, it takes like 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks to get accustomed to it, and I was like remapping it as I was going to, so it wasn't even staying still. But I mean, once you get down to it, I'd say you might take once you're totally adjusted to it, it might be slightly slower than a full-size keyboard, but not by much.
And it is how quickly you actually type?
Right around 100 words per minute. I've been throwing it for a loop recently with all this shifting around.
Yeah.
So,
no kidding.
And then when you're doing programming, you got all the there's more punctuation, so you end up going a little slower.
Yeah.
But,
I was just talking to Sally last week about how he's constantly changing his key bindings too. So,
yeah.
What's this with your brain?
Oh yeah.
I guess you eventually get used to it. And I noticed that your actual key bindings in your Emacs configuration are not as long as one would expect with a highly customized keyboard and everything. I guess you just leave everything else where they are.
Yeah. So a lot of it I have the Emacs key bindings, and then I have also I use a small program called Xbind keys that will let you run basically. It's like binding shell commands in Emacs, but it works when you're in the browser or outside Emacs, which for me is just in the browser. But all my music or a lot of stuff gets shifted out to there if I want to have it accessible everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went through when I stopped using the starter kit and switched over to better defaults. I went through and went with a clear slate, and I just brought back in the ones that I felt like I missed. So.
Yeah, declaring Emacs bankruptcy. You're just starting a clean slate and bring your config slowly back in. Yeah, that's cool.
So.
Okay, so that was the digression from Paraho.
Sure, yeah.
What's idle highlight mode? I haven't actually played around with that.
Oh, yeah, that's another one that actually came out of the Emacs IRC channel. I think someone asked a question about how do you, basically how it works is you just, when you leave the point on any identifier for a while, it'll highlight all other instances of that identifier. So it's a thing you see in IDEs fairly often. Dr. Racket does it. Does a particularly good job of it because it actually works with lexical scope, which is really cool. And mine is just a dumb regex. But yeah, someone just drops on the IRC channel and asks, "How do you do this?" And someone else is like, "Oh, it can't be that hard. Let me just blah, 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 blah." And they put it in a gist or something, and it's like, "Do you mind if I take that? Because that's awesome."
I'm getting a picture here of how a lot of Emacs customizations come to be. They're like, oh, I have this crazy idea. Oh, that doesn't look like it seems to,
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't seem to be hard. Well, let me go spend 4 hours working on this instead of my actual work.
Yeah, guilty as charged. I have to admit to that. Yeah, I wrote. I have a it's called a paste site called SCPaste that I wrote when I think it must have been back when pasty.org before GIST launched. During downtime of this other paste site that I was using. You know what? Why isn't this just static files? Oh, this is annoying. So it just uses Emacs to HTMLize the font lock settings, and then uses SCP to just put it on a web server and doesn't go down.
And so that's how you
So,
keep your configuration small. So you package up all these little bits of functionality and push it out there. But I think it's funny that you're like, oh, let me just go fix this while this other service is down and make things happen. Or like, oh, I'm just going to sit down during a flight to San Francisco and bash out these fixes for this REPL or whatever. Very cool stuff.
well, to be fair, that one I didn't actually end up finishing. That you're probably talking about Cider,
Yeah, yeah.
which I kind of put together a proof of concept, and then I was like, oh, this is more complicated than I thought it would be, and I threw it out there, and someone else ran with it, and I was really glad that they did. Because they did a pretty good job. That's the closure REPL
Yeah.
client for Emacs.
I don't suppose you've got, I know this isn't your normal setup computer, but I don't suppose you have a demo of what the lovely closure or Lisp development environment looks like.
I could probably on the SIME node, I could pull that up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
All right, let me sit. I can switch back to screen shares on my side.
cool. Yeah. Uh, I
All right, I'm here.
cool. Okay.
Bigger than mine. I will make my screen bigger. All right. Okay. Here we go.
So this is line again, the kind of like the project automation tool,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to need Cider. Cider being the Lisp client for the REPL protocol that Clojure uses. It's kind of it's similar to how Slime works, where you have the the language runtime that opens a socket
Yeah.
server, and then you use Emacs as a client to connect to that,
Yeah.
and you can have multiple different clients connecting. And I'm gonna apologize upfront because I don't know off the top of my head if this is going to work on these particular dot files, but
That's
I'll give it a
okay.
try here. So this is going to,
Oh, there's no Java.
yeah, that's an easy fix, but um,
I was playing around with Cider because I started looking into Clojure and it was really easy to get going. And it was great because I could actually get it working with org, Babel's literate programming, sort of put stuff in blocks and execute them in just send them to the code and have the output show up there. So it's
yeah, I haven't played with that myself, but yeah, they've done a good job of hooking it into various cooling systems. That's still installed.
yeah.
Uh, Yeah, and actually I just realized, unfortunately, this is not going to be the latest version of Cider, which looks quite a bit nicer, but is yeah, not available on online yet.
That's okay. If we can get people to say, "Oh, that looks interesting," and then they can have their minds totally blown by the newest version, and that's all good. And then they'll have more Emacs converts.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. So the one of the biggest complaints about Clojure development, unfortunately, is that the startup time for the REPL is rather high. Um, but typically, with uh, Clojure and other lists, you end up starting a session for the day and you just stay connected for days on end. And you would
Oh,
typically only restart if you had to clear out some bad state or
yeah.
add a new dependency or something like that. So,
So it's exactly the Emacs startup philosophy then.
oh yeah, totally. That's part of Lisp heritage going back to the 80s.
All right, so you've got this user prompt, and this is where people can put all sorts of things in.
Yeah, and then yeah, you open up your source files and you need space declarations. I have a white background here, so this is probably going to look a
Oh
little
no, I'm
weird.
on a dark background over here. I
No,
can
it's no
probably
problem.
change my colors.
I can turn off HLI mode,
Yeah, there you
which
go.
makes it a little reasonable there. Um, so yeah, it's hard to think of something actually interesting.
Oh, just your standard hello world, I suppose. Oh, there you go. Oh, hi.
And then, so yeah, you just compile that and then change the REPL to the namespace you're in, and pass a keyword in there. Yeah, so there's quite a bit more. Like actually the newest version has much better like stack trace things. So if you're going to put in something like this, you get. Oh yeah, that's. The stack traces are often a complaint with Clojure, but the new CIDR does a really good job of like showing you just what you're.
So this is not this is not a representative demo of CIDR awesomeness. You should go for the real thing. But it's interesting to see how quickly you can spin that up in a fresh EC2 for pairing or other things like that.
Right. So typically, I ended up kicking this off with non-Clojure project, but if you use Sime to collaborate on a Clojure project, then it's going to go in and see, oh, this is a Clojure project, and it's going to install Lime Java for you automatically, OpenJDK. So you wouldn't have to go through the boring prerequisites.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this machine is probably configured for better defaults is what I would pick this off on. So if we were going to hack on that, we could go in and make some changes there.
Yeah, all sorts of good stuff.
Yeah. So it's been useful for me. Yeah. So I don't know if you saw, but we've got the line again.
You have the shirt
right there. So yeah, that's part of my job at Heroku is maintaining the Clojure support for the platform. So I get to work on one of my big open source projects which has worked out really well.
Yay, Heroku. So the other question then is, have you gotten your kids to start using Emacs and Clojure?
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. I have been right now. I'm starting more on Learn to Type, which is a great prerequisite. But in the meantime, there are a couple things I've been doing. There's a project called Scratch, which is from the MIT Media Lab. Yeah, so you're familiar. It's a really fascinating kind of drag and drop environment for building programming skills in children and grown-ups that want to have fun too. But it's so immediate and it's so eye-grabbing. It's so obvious how to just put the pieces together. If you want to get a loop, you just grab a loop and bring it over, and you put in the numbers, and you say these are the steps to do in between. Make your character. It's all based around sprites and characters. So for someone who hasn't developed a lot of abstract reasoning, it's so obvious, like that. This character, instead of like manipulating numbers or something, you're saying, I want to change my X position, and there you go. It's moving. So like kids can get a grasp of things like the Cartesian plane or things like that really intuitively in a way that relates to what they know already. They're really happy with that. But it does kind of like, I guess there's an abstraction ceiling to it. You can't do very much factoring out of functions and things like that. Things like recursion are really difficult to address.
If you can get your 4-year-old or your 6-year-old understanding recursion, they'll be well ahead of a lot of undergraduates.
Yeah, and it's just tedious to not be able to copy and paste and things like that too. So it's got its strength in that it's really accessible and appealing. But I've also been looking at Racket for kind of the more the next step there, which is so Racket's a dialect of Scheme originally that has kind of grown to be more than just this small Scheme standard, and become a lot more practical. But it also has really fantastic teaching materials for it.
Wow.
And the one that I'm most interested in that I've started reading for myself is How to Design Programs, htdp.org, where it talks about programming in terms of really interesting terms, in that it starts off with arithmetic. You have your numbers. These are values that you can operate on them by passing them to functions, and you get numbers back. And then it says, oh, by the way, strings are the same way. Strings are values. You pass them to functions, you get strings back. And then, like, in the first chapter, it says, oh yeah, and images, same thing. These are just values. You can paste an image into the Racket REPL, and it's there. You can assign it to a variable. You can pass it to a function, and you can compose them. You can say, like, I'm gonna overlay these. I'm gonna put them side by side.
Wow.
And so, like, the aha moment for me was just they were saying, so you have an image. Animation is really just a reduce of a function that returns images over a range of a frame range. That's all it takes.
That's awesome.
And that's the first chapter, right?
Oh, so, okay. I have to check out Racket.
Yeah, How to Design Programs is that book, and I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into it. I have a little bit of like buffer time while my kids learn to type, and it's time for me to get ahead as the teacher.
That's wonderful.
It's a lot of fun, yeah. And it's got a nice Emacs mode similar to Cider, but for kids, I think Dr. Racket is going to be Dr. Racket's ID that ships with Racket is probably going to be a little more accessible, and that I would wait on Emacs until there's more of a foundation there, and so they get a little more literacy there. So.
And then they can reliably hit 2 or 3 keys at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, we've done a little bit in Dr. Racket with me driving. We did some what do you call it? Caesar ciphers, where you do A is 1, B is 2, and then you can add an offset. So they've been sending messages to their grandparents and back and forth using a code wheel. And I wanted to show them how it could be so much easier writing a program for it. So that was a big hit.
Great. You're teaching your kids cryptography. Very, very basic cryptography. This is all cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's so fun to see how they really get into something like that, and secret messages are great.
That's wonderful. And so you're helping the kids learn, and you get to see what they struggle with, what they take to, what they really resonate with. And I also like the fact that a lot of your, with better defaults and some of these other packages, you're also working on making Emacs easier for other people to get into. Maybe they're new to Emacs and they're trying things out, and at least they don't have to be mystified by all these antiquated options.
Yeah, I like to take usability pretty seriously and see how far I can push it. That was a big part of I think what I was doing with Line Again in the Clojure world, and why that took off is that it needs to be very tedious to try to get started, and being able to automate that and make it very declarative goes a long way. And I think we've come a long way since 2008 with packages and just the availability and easy installation there. But I think there's a lot more you can do. With the starter kit, my plan has been for version 3 to be like no software, to have it just be prose documentation, where it says here are here's where to get started with the built-in tutorials, and then once you're done there, like, here are some pointers to the modes that you would hopefully find the most useful, and and contribute to the documentation of individual modes more, and try to make sure they're packaged well, and easy to get started with. So yeah, haven't made a lot of progress in there apart from the better defaults package, I think, which was the first step there. But yeah,
I'd love to help out with that. I'd love to see what your to-do list of ideas looks like for that one. But actually, since you care a lot about usability and packaging and documentation, I was curious if there were some packages that you really liked or looked up to because they were well packaged or well documented or very approachable. What are the stars for you?
probably I was really impressed by the documentation of Magit when I first got started with it. It was quite thorough for a third-party package. I feel like the built-in stuff is actually usually pretty solid, like anything that ships with Emacs. But with the community packages, it can often be more hit or miss, and they did a good job with it there with info manual. Slime's manual was really good if you're doing common Lisp. And yeah, like org, I guess, is technically built in, but they do a really good job of making sure everything's really thorough. But on the other hand, something I like almost as much as a well-documented package is a package that's so small that it's just obvious,
Yeah.
Like idle highlight, I think, is that way. It's like it does what it says on the tin, and you're never going to need to configure it, or I mean, it's just the one hook, and that's it, right? Like, yeah. And there's more that are like that I feel like if you can just find your thing and nail it, that's great. Yeah, I feel like I do is right on the edge of that, but not quite there because there's still some tricky places there where like say you're using IDO and you want to create a new file, but it keeps jumping to an existing file. Like that, a lot of newcomers to IDO are like, oh, this is annoying. I'm getting rid of this. Where it's not obvious, but you press Control F there and it disables it temporarily. So I don't have a great answer there, but I wish there was that one thing that would stop being a roadblock, because like IDO just makes things so much smoother. When you're doing that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, something like that would make it a whole lot easier for everyone to get started with. I tend to recommend it to everyone usually. It's either that or Helm, which is actually the one that I end up using.
Oh, okay. I've heard good things about that, but I haven't actually gotten a chance yet to try it.
Cool. That looks like a massive water jug, by the way, but.
No. Yeah, that's the one thing about being out in the shed in the backyard is there's no plumbing out here. There's electricity and network and heat, but no plumbing. So.
I know the fact that you have networking in your shed.
Well, actually, the beyond that is, I guess I can show you this. This is I'm kind of proud of this. But over here is my my heater that keeps me alive during the winter months. But I don't know how much of that.
I see it. Yeah, I see something with lights.
You can see that's a relay that is hooked up to this. I'm sorry. Yeah, so you can see that that's that's a BeagleBone Black. It's kind of like a single board Linux computer, and that is controlling the heater via a relay with an XMPP bot running on there. So I can just go into my chat and be like, I need the heat on, so I'm going to go out later today, bring it up, and then I can query it too to try to find out, has the heater got a chance to kick in yet?
Sorry, you said you're talking to it through chat. So like you're in the ERC and you're telling your shed to be warmer.
Yep. Got a kick out of that, yeah. And that's actually kind of how I picked up Erlang. I was able to use Erlang for that, and now I'm using it at work. So it turned out pretty well.
Wow. Okay, I think that is an excellent note to wrap up on. You get to the point where you're controlling your environment using Emacs. I
Well, I
think
wouldn't have it any other way.
it'll be interesting to see if there's a package for that and if other people end up using it. So
Cool.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. I'm going to wrap up over here. Folks can
Great.
find this on the event page, and I'll also post it up on emacslife.com. There will be a transcript at some point as well, which will be interesting as I try to spell all the lovely things that we have mentioned. But yeah,
Well done.
thanks again. I'm going to start the broadcast here, and